Greetings, brothers and sisters, within the Kingdom of England, Empire of Albion. It is your noble brother, Dion de Belmont, from the illustrious house of Belmont. And today is December 21st, 2975 of the Berber calendar, which is equivalent to the 2025 Gregorian calendar. And like I say, and like we say here always, it is a beautiful time to be alive. Have to give honors to our creator, to our forefathers, to our saints, martyrs, to our king, queen, to the loyal subjects, to the righteous, to the brothers and sisters, and those who are holding on and waiting. The waiting for the truth to be revealed in this day and time that we call our reality. And I have to give honors to our king. I have to give honors to the ancestors in regards to helping do this great work, as well as the revealing of this information. And the reason why we're going to be talking about Saturn, um, lately the spirit's been pulling me to speak on Saturn and bring out the truth in regard to what has been veiled for a very long time and has been talked about in various corners and in various different platforms. Um, but it's need to be reiterated from the mouth of those who this information truly pertains to, because we are that noble lineage and descendants from those who lived in existence during the time they call the Golden Age, known as those uh, primordial beings who are also known as the Golden Race. And during this time, our heavens looked a lot different than what we see today. And this story is told by many different civilizations from their point of view, but all stemming down to one fact, that they all speaking about the same entity, and that entity we call today is planet Saturn. And Saturn in astrology is known to be many different things. One of that is Father Time, historically known as Kronos in Roman mythology. Um, the story of Kronos eating his children, eating one of his children to pretty much take over the throne. And the case of the child that took over the throne was Jupiter. But before we go into that, I'd rather us go ahead and read what Mr. David N. Talbott wrote in regards to Saturn, his book called The Saturn Myth. And within this book, The Saturn Myth, we're going to be able to see a lot of information that has been hidden from us and shrouded in secrecy. But nevertheless, the day and time was going to come when the truth was going to make its way to see the light of day. And in this case, Saturn's light. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I might do this in multiple parts because the length of the book, and I may not even read every page. I just really want to get you a good idea about what it's about, and the belief that not only the ancients had in regards to Saturn, but also too what many of us today are going to come to understand and accept as truth for us. So therefore we can live in alignment and hopefully be able to be part of a golden age once again. All right, so it's called Saturn Myth, a reinterpretation of rites and symbols, illuminating some of the dark corners of primordial society by David N. Talbott. Intrigued by Velikovsky's claim that Saturn was once the preeminent planetary god, David Talbott resolved to examine its mythical character. I wanted to know if he wrote if ancient sources had a coherent story to tell about the planet. I had no inkling of the spectacular tale hidden in the chronicles. In this startling reinterpretation of age-old symbolism, Talbott argues that the great god or universal monarch of the ancients was not the sun, but Saturn, which once hung ominously close to the earth and visually dominated the heavens. Talbott's close textual and symbolic analysis reveals the fundamental themes of Saturn. Imagery improves that all of them, including the cosmic ship, the island at the top of the world, the eye of heaven, and the revolving temple, were based on celestial observations in the northern sky. In addition, he shows how such diverse symbols as the cross, sun wheels, holy mountains, crowns of royalty, and sacred pillars grew out of ancient Saturn worship. Talbot contends that Saturn's appearance at the time, radically different from today, inspired man's leap into civilization, since many aspects of early civilization can be seen as conscious efforts to reenact or commemorate Saturn's organization of his celestial kingdom. A fascinating look at ancient history and cosmology, the Saturn Myth is a provocative book that might well change the way you think about a man's history and the history of the universe. David N. Talbot is the founder and former publisher of Penseed, a outgrowth of the Student Academic Forum, which developed a book, Velikovsky Reconsidered. He is also the co-author of The Ecstasy of Sadi Ra, a cosmological mystery. He now lives with his family in Oregon. All right. And here's the table of comments. Introduction, Myth and Catastrophe. 2, the Great Father, the one God of archaic monotheism, the universal monarch, the age of Chronos, the rights of kingship, the heaven man, who was Adam, the Great Father Saturn, Saturn myth reconstructed. The polar sun, chapter 3, sun and Saturn, day and night, Saturn and the pole, the unmoved mover, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, the Americas. All right, and if we may stop there, but let's go ahead and get started. Introduction. The planet Saturn today is recognizable only to those who know where to look for it. But a few thousand years ago, Saturn dominated the Earth as a sun, presiding over a universal golden age. Modern man considers it self-evident that our familiar heavens differ hardly at all from the heavens encountered by the earliest star worshippers. He assumes that the most distinctive bodies venerated in primitive times were the sun and moon, followed by the 5 visible planets and various constellations, all appearing as they do today, but for such ever so slight changes as the precession of the equinoxes. This long-standing belief not only confines present discussion of ancient myth and religion, it is the fixed doctrine of modern astronomy and geology. Every prevailing theory of the solar system and of Earth's past rests upon an underlying doctrine of cosmic uniformity, the belief that the clock-like regularity of heavenly motions can be projected backward indefinitely. But the evidence assembled in the following pages indicates that within human memory, extraordinary changes in the planetary system occurred. In the earliest age recalled by man, the planet Saturn was the most spectacular light in the heavens, and its impact on the ancient world overwhelming. In fact, Saturn was the one great god invoked by all mankind. The first religious symbols were symbols of Saturn, and so pervasive was the planet god's influence, and that the ancients knew him as the creator, the king of the world, and Adam, the first man. Since the only meaningful defense of this claim is the entire body of evidence presented here, I shall not presume upon the reader's credulity, but only ask that he follow the narrative to its end. Myth and catastrophe. If our generation disdains the possibility of fact in the language of myth, it is because we are aware of discrepancy between myth and the modern worldview. when we ascribe it to the blindness or superstition of the ancients. There is hardly an ancient tale which fails to speak of world-destroying upheavals and shifting cosmic orders. Indeed, we are so accustomed to the catastrophic character of the stories that we hardly give it a second thought. When the myth tells of suns which have come and gone, or of planetary gods whose wars threaten to destroy mankind, we are likely to take them as amusing and absurdly exaggerated accounts of local floods, earthquakes, and eclipses, or write them off altogether as expressions of unconstrained fancy. How many scholars seeking to unravel the astronomical legends and symbols of antiquity have questioned whether the heavenly bodies have always coursed on the same paths they follow today? In the past 300 years, barely a handful of writers have claimed any connection between myth and actual celestial catastrophe. William Winston published in 1696 A New Theory of the Earth, arguing that the biblical deluge resulted from the cometary cataclysm. The book produced a storm of scientific objections and had no lasting impact outside of Christian orthodoxy. In 1882 and 1883, two books by Ignatius Danelli appeared: Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, and Ragnarok, the Age of Fire and Gravel. Relying on global myths, Danelli claimed that a massive continent called Atlantis once harbored a primordial civilization, but the entire land sank beneath the sea when the comet rained destruction on the earth. Both of Donnelly's books became bestsellers and are still available today. Yet unconventional theories of Earth and the solar system remain unaffected by these works. Around the turn of the century, Isaac Bell argued in a series of brief papers that myths of cosmic upheaval relate to the collapse of ice bands surrounding our planet. 3/4 of a century after his death, his work is familiar only to the esoteric few. In 1913, Hans Horbiger published his Glacial Cosmogony, contending that the great catastrophes described in ancient myth occurred when the Earth captured another planet, which became our moon. The relatively small interest in Horbiger's thesis vanished within a couple of decades. This was the extent of noteworthy research into myth and catastrophe when Immanuel Velikovsky in early 1940 first wondered whether a cosmic disturbance may have accompanied the Hebrew Exodus. According to the biblical account, massive plagues occurred, Sinai erupted, and a pillar of cloud and fire moved in the sky. His quest for a solution led Velikovsky through a systematic survey of world mythology and eventually to the conclusion that ancient myths constitute a collective memory of celestial disorder. The great gods, Velikovsky observed, appear explicitly as planets. In the Titanic Wars, vividly depicted by ancient chroniclers, the planets moved on erratic courses, appearing to wage battles in the sky, exchanging electrical discharges, and more than once menacing the Earth. Velikovsky set forth his claims of celestial catastrophe in his book Worlds in Collision, published in 1950, proposing that first Venus and then Mars, in the period 1500 to 686 BC, so disturbed the Earth's axis as to produce worldwide destruction. The book became an immediate bestseller and a focus of one of the great scientific controversies of this century. I mention Velikovsky not only because his work obviously relates to the thesis of this book, but because, as a matter of record, Velikovsky first directed my attention towards Saturn. In a manuscript still awaiting publication, Velikovsky proposed that the now distant planet was once the dominant heavenly body, and he identified Saturn's epoch with the legendary Golden Age. While I have not seen Velikovsky's unpublished manuscript on Saturn, a brief outline of his ideal inspired the present inquiry. Was Saturn once the preeminent light in the heavens? Yet I possessed at the outset no conception of the broad thesis presented here, which fell into place with surprising rapidity once I set out to reconstruct the Saturn myth. While expecting to find, at best, only faint echoes of Saturn, or no hint at all, I found instead that the ancients, looking back to the beginnings, were obsessed with the planet god and strove in 1,000 ways to relive Saturn's epoch. The most common symbols of antiquity, which our age universally regards as solar symbols. And you can see these emblems, etc. were, excuse me, Okay, hopefully that makes it easier. So here's the symbols or the solar emblems. All right, now we think these are solar emblems. Okay, it says were originally unrelated to our sun. They were literal pictures of Saturn. So you see these symbols that we thought were the sun symbols, these are actually symbols of Saturn. All right, so like our solar cross, Saturn. All right, whom the entire ancient world invoked as the sun. All right, so Saturn was known as the sun historically or the ancient times. And what he was back then, he will be now again. In the original age to which the myths refer, Saturn was no remote speck faintly discerned by terrestrial observers. The planet loomed as an awesome and terrifying light. And if we are to believe the widespread accounts of Saturn's age, the planet god's home was the unmoving celestial pole, the apparent pivot of the heavens, far removed from the visible path of Saturn today. At first glance, however, the Saturn myth seems to present an entanglement of bizarre images. The earliest, most venerated religious texts depict the great god sailing in a celestial ship, consorting with winged goddesses, fashioning revolving islands, cities, and temples, or abiding upon the shoulders of a cosmic giant. It is impossible to pursue Saturn's ancient image without encountering the paradise of Eden, the lost Atlantis, the fountain of youth, the one-wheeled chariot of the gods, the all-seeing eye of heaven, or the serpent dragon of the deep. Though celebrated as living, visible powers, none of Saturn's personifications or mythical habits conforms to anything in our familiar world. Yet once one seeks out the concrete nature of these images, it becomes clear that each refer to the same celestial form. The subject is a Saturnian configuration of startling simplicity, whose appearance, transformation, and eventual disappearance became the focus of all ancient rites. I now have little doubt that if Velikovsky had pursued the Saturn question to the end, he would have perceived a vastly greater influence of the planet than he originally recognized. He would have discovered also that the full story of Saturn adds a new perspective to much of the mythological material gathered in Worlds in Collision. In this connection, I must stress that I alone am responsible for the themes and conclusions presented in his book, realizing that Velikovsky has had to defend his own heresy for better than a quarter of a century. I've had no desire to burden him with the heresy of others. Nothing came as a greater surprise to me than the sheer quantity of material bearing directly on the Saturn tradition. The scope of the subject matter made it necessary to separate the material into two volumes, the first dealing with the original Saturnian apparition, the second with Saturn's catastrophic fate. This initial volume then focused on the primordial age of cosmic harmony and the unified image of Saturn as king of the world. Chapter 2, The Great Father. Anyone attempting to trace the Saturn legend must reckon with the primordial god figure whom ancient races celebrate as the Great Father, and who is said to have first organized the heavens and founded the antediluvian kingdom of peace and plenty, the Golden Age. While few of us today could locate Saturn in the starry sphere, the earliest astral religions insist that the planet god was once the all-powerful ruler of heaven. But paradoxically, they also declared that he resided on earth as a great king. He was the father both of gods and the man. This dual character of the Great Father has been the subject of centuries-long but unresolved debate. Was he a living ancestor subsequently exaggerated into a cosmic divinity? Or was he originally a celestial god whom later myths reduced to human proportions? For explanation of Great Father, researchers look to such varied powers as the solar orb, an esteemed tribal chief, or an abstract vegetation cycle. Almost uniformly ignored is the connection of the primordial man god with the actual planet Saturn, even though it is precisely the latter that can tell us why the Great Father appears in both human and celestial form. The overwhelming preoccupation of ancient ritual is with an ancient great god. One, the myths say that the god emerged alone from the cosmic sea as the preeminent power in the heavens. Out of the watery chaos, he produced a new order. The ancients worshipped him as the creator and the supreme lord of the cosmos. This solitary god, according to legend, founded a kingdom of unparalleled splendor. He was the divine ancestor of all earthly rulers. His kingdom, the prototype of the just and prosperous realm. Throughout his reign, an unending spring prevailed, and the land produced freely, and men knew neither labor nor war. In the god king's towering form, the ancients perceived the heaven man, a primordial giant whose body was the newly organized cosmos. The legends often present the figure as the first man or primordial man, whose history personified the struggle of good and evil. 4. Whether emphasizing the great father's character as creator, first king, or heaven man, widespread traditions proclaim him to be the planet Saturn. In investigating the traits of the archaic god, we must give the greatest weight to the oldest astral religions, those which are closest to the original experience. The best material coming from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia provides a remarkably coherent picture of the god and enables one to see the development and the distortions of the idea among later peoples. What is most surprising, however, is the enduring power of the root themes, the one God of archaic monotheism. In the beginning, the ancients knew one supreme God only, a divinity invoked as the creator and the father of all the gods. According to a long-established school of thought, man's consciousness of supreme being emerged slowly from a primitive fascination with petty spirits and demons. Adherents to this opinion tell us that the human reason gradually modified capricious spirits of vegetation, spring, the ancestors, or sexual power into the great gods of global religion. Of such an evolutionary process, however, one finds little evidence. The great edifices erected by Herbert Spencer, E.B. Tyler, and James G. Fraser appear to rest exclusively on the assumption that one can learn the origins of theism by studying existing primitive cultures. The ideal is that the civilized races of old must have first passed through primitive phases. Before the Hebrews, Greeks, or Hindus developed their elevated ideas of a supreme God, they must have possessed beliefs and customs similar to those of modern-day tribes of Africa, Australia, or Polynesia. Only by slow development, say these theorists, could a race rise above the ludicrous magic, totems, and fetishes of the savage. It is interesting that the advocates of the various evolutionary theories and their fascination with present-day primitive cultures almost never concern themselves with the oldest religious texts and symbols which have come down to us. The sacred hymns and eulogies of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia reveal a tradition of a great God reaching back into prehistoric times. Moreover, a comparison of early and later sources, rather than suggesting a development, actually indicates the disintegration of a once unified ideal into magic, astrology, totemism, and other elements which the evolutionists associate the first stages of religion. All right. So before we start getting to the next phase of part one, is we can see going all the way back into ancient antiquity that all the civilizations had a belief into one God or the king of gods or the God of gods or the God of all gods. And in this case, they were personified as human beings, but nevertheless, they were actually speaking about celestial spirits or celestial bodies that they saw in the heavens. And in this case, this God of all gods or Heavenly Father was none other than Saturn. All right, so Saturn was known as the father of the father of the golden age, the primeval sun, the father who sat on the throne, aka in the northern sky, before things changed up from what we see today in our heavens or in our skies. All right, let's continue. All right, and so before we go to this part, for those of you who've been paying attention to the channel, know that us Berbers believe in pretty much what is it we're going to be speaking about in regards to the heavens, the moon, the sun, the stars, technically astrology, astronomy, cosmology. All of this can be going back to Berber traditional religion. And then also, too, for those of you who don't know, that the Berber traditional religion is where the Egyptians get their belief in the gods like Amen and Atum and the other gods that's spoken of in the Egyptiology. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. Atum, the solitary god of beginnings. There are grounds for speaking of an archaic monotheism, astro in nature, existing long before the ideal of God received its spiritual and philosophical elevation in the Hebrew and Greek thought. To the ancients themselves, the entire question was simply a matter of concrete history. The present world is a fragmented copy of an earlier age in which the supreme light God stood alone in a primeval sea, occupying the cosmic center. Ancient Egyptians' texts repeatedly invoke a singular figure worshipped as the greatest and the highest light of the primeval age. One of his many names was Atum, a god, born in the abyss before the sky existed, before the earth existed. These are the words of the pyramid text, perhaps the world's oldest religious hymns, but the texts of all periods look back to the same primordial time where Atum shone forth alone. I came into being of myself in the midst of the primeval waters, states the God in the Book of the Dead. More than once, the coffin text recalled the time when Atum was alone before he had repeated himself. He was alone in the primeval waters, they say. I was the spirit in the primeval waters, he who had no companion when my name came into existence. Each locality in Egypt appears to have possessed its own special representative of the Father God. To some, he was Horus, the god who came first into being when no other god had yet came into existence, when the name of anything had yet been proclaimed. Other traditions knew him as Ra, the god one, who came into being in the beginning of time. O thou who didst give thyself birth, O one, mighty one of myriad forms and aspects, king of the world. The followers of Amen proclaimed their God, the ancient of heaven, father of the gods. Ptah was the splendid God who existed alone in the beginning. The different local names of the primeval deity, though adding complexity to Egyptian religion as a whole, do not cloud the underlying idea. He is the God one, the only one, the father of beginnings, the supreme Lord, the singular God, except whom at the beginning none other existed. Surveying Egyptian religion, one cannot fail to notice the priest's obsession with the past and their vivid portrait of the great God in his first appearance. Those who look for an unseen creator in early Egyptian religion will be disappointed. He is visible and in concrete power, the Lord of Terror or the Great of Terror. The memory of his solitary light God and creator was an ode as the most ancient Egyptian ritual. His appearance and eventual departure shaped every aspect of the Egyptian worldview. So also in Mesopotamia, about which Stephen Langdon raises the question of archaic monotheism, after prolonged study of Semitic and Sumerian sources, Langdon concluded that the veneration of spirits and demons had nothing to do with the origins of Mesopotamian religion. Rather, both in Sumerian and Semitic religions, monotheism preceded polytheism, and belief in good and evil spirits. Langdon notes that on the pictographic tablets of the prehistoric period, the picture of a star repeatedly appears. The sign, he claims, is virtually the only religious symbol of the primitive period, and in the early Sumerian language, the star symbol is the ideogram for writing God, high, heaven, and bright. It is also the ideogram of an oldest and loftiest of the Sumerian gods. An, or Anu, was the father of the gods and the central light at the universe summit, a god of terrifying splendor who governed heaven from his throne in the cosmic sea Apsu. But the Sumero-Babylonian pantheon is filled with competing figures of the primordial creator. Enki, or Ea, Ningersu, Ninurta, Tamuzik appears as a local formulation of the of the same great god. Each shares in the character of the singular An, ruling as universal Lord, fashioning his home above and radiating the light in the midst of the celestial ocean. Here, as in Egypt, the God of archaic monotheism is not transcendent spirit or invisible power, but a central light. A Sumerian epic to Ninurta proclaims, Anu in the midst of heaven gave him fearful splendor. Ninurta, according to the text, is like Anu and cast a shadow of glory over the land. All Mesopotamian figures of the primeval god possess this tangible character, and accounts of the god's radiant appearance are more of a historical than a speculative nature. Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions of the solitary creator find many parallels in later Hebrew, Greek, Persian, Hindu, and Chinese mysticism and philosophy, but it is the earlier imagery which illuminates the later. And however unorthodox the idea may seem, the oldest records treat the great gods birthed in the deep and his acts of creation as events experienced by the ancestors. Hearts were pervaded with fear. Hearts were pervaded with terror when I was born in the abyss, proclaims the god of the pyramid text. The solitary god in the presence of the ancestors brought forth the primeval world or earth. To understand the great God's creation, one must put aside modern philosophical and religious conceptions. The tradition has nothing to do with the origins of our planet or of the material universe. The subject of the original creation legend is the formation of the great God's visible dwelling above. The legend records that when the creator rose from the cosmic sea, a great band or revolving island congealed around the god as his home. The band appeared as a well-defined, organized, and geometrically unified dwelling, a celestial land fashioned by the Great Father. All space outside this enclosure belonged to unorganized chaos. All right. So once again, I'm going to probably throw a little bit of commentary in there, some of my opinions, because I don't want this to seem like just a dry read. And it's a reason why I'm reading this information because, like they say, history repeats itself and our reality is fashioned from our predecessors. So what happened back then to them is happening to us. The only difference is they knew what's happening to them and what was going to happen to us. We have no recollection of the past unless we read the material that the ancients read and left in some form of understanding for us, whether that's an oral tradition, writing it down, whatever it was that they used faculty wise that we today need to understand. And from I can see from understanding is based off of observing our reality from the outside in. And so as I see, especially me also had to live in that reality and been affected by it. The All Father or Saturn, he represents stability, he represents law, he represents order, he represents structure, and this is just even from what's going from the astrological understanding. So therefore, we can kind of see what's kind of happening to us here in our reality today because of the All Father is no longer here. Is no longer seen. He's no longer seen or as a concern. And the reason why I'm saying this is because of look what's going on, and especially in the West with the fighting of the dynamics of the male and females or the man and the woman. And if you understand astrology, you will understand that the father figure in astrology is the man. You know, the mother figure is technically considered Cancer or the moon. And you know, the woman or the feminine energy is representation of Venus and the male representation of Mars or whatever. And we all have these energies within us. But what's happening is because of the effects of Saturn not being here, and this is my interpretation, the effect of the father not being here, because the father is considered gone or distant. And part of the archetype of Saturn is seen as cold, you know, distant. He's considered father time. He's known as the son of the night. And in my opinion, like they say, we grow at night. That's because the power and the energy is coming from Saturn. You know, Saturn controls that. And historically, in ancient times, Saturn controlled the skies 24/7. Like he was stationary. Like we're speaking inside the text. Saturn was a stationary entity. And when he was a stationary entity, this was during a time considered the golden age. Well, let's put it into our perspective today as it was going on in our reality. When the father is home, aka the king, when the king is home, the kingdom is eating good and plenty. The king is taking care of everyone. No one is hurting. Everyone has all of the resources that we need. That's what Saturn represented. Saturn represented us having everything that we need. We're living in abundance. This was considered the Garden of Eden. We lived in the Garden of Eden during the time of the Golden Age. Adam was who? Was the original man, aka Saturn. Saturn was Adam in the flesh. And as we recognize that we are the descendants of Adam, aka the descendants of Saturn. But I'm going to show you this as we continue reading the text. So keep your mind open for what I'm speaking about, because why we're seeing all of this happening now is because we're getting ready for a new age. And to transition to that new age is going to be a lot of chaos and confusion. Like I said, we're dealing with a critical degrees of understanding and transitioning into a new paradigm. And so with that being said, it's going to be a bumpy ride. But for those, like I said, who knows what time it is, because ain't nothing new underneath the sun. We did this before. We're going to be ready and we're going to be prepared. And through the age of Aquarius, you have to know who's the Lord or who's the ruler. Who is the ancient ruler of Aquarius? Saturn. They say Uranus for traditional, but we're going back to the ancient times because they didn't see Uranus and the view where Saturn was. Saturn was closer, Uranus was behind, but we ain't going to talk about that yet. But the point I'm making is that we're getting ready for Saturn's return in a big good way. All right, let's continue. So it says, the band appeared as the well-defined, organized, and geometrically unified dwelling, a celestial land fashioned by the Great Father. All space outside this enclosure belonged to unorganized chaos. So they're saying outside the Father's domain, within the Father fashion, is all chaos. So the Father represents peace. Outside the Father represents chaos, disorder, disharmony. And we see how that's happening here now when, unfortunately, when the Father figure is not there, there's a lot of chaos that takes place because there's no one there to keep the order, no one keep the rules. Let's continue. In the later section of this book, I intend to show that ancient races the world over recorded pictures of the great God and his circular abode. The images were, as we can see, this symbol is the symbol they use for the sun, and this symbol is the symbol they use for Earth. But in this case, it's taking you the symbol there was for Saturn. So there's a real big, as we can see, there's a big connection between not only our sun and the planet Earth with Saturn. We've been interpreting these symbols wrong, and now that we're looking at them through the eyes of the ancients, we can kind of see what they truly are. All right. So it says, so the second more complete form, showing streams of light radiating from the God to animate his city of heaven. The words which in the ancient languages denote this enclosure receive various translations as heaven, cosmos, world, land, earth, netherland terms, which take on vastly different meanings in modern usage. In their original sense, the words signified one and the same thing, a band of light which appeared to set apart the sacred gown of the great God from the rest of space. One cannot begin a survey of the Great Father without confronting his celestial enclosure, but a full discussion of this dwelling will be possible only after certain other aspects of the single God receive clarification. I mentioned the enclosure now in order to indicate the general and unconventional direction of this investigation. When texts cited in the following pages employ the terms heaven, earth, or world, the reader should know that the usual interpretation will not be my interpretation. All right, so like he's saying, a lot of these words that he's going to be speaking inside this text are the interpretation from an ancient understanding and not from a modern understanding. Because in our modern reality, they changed the words and flipped it to hide the truth. Because remember, Saturn is considered the hidden one. So they hid the Father, or in this case, because of what happened, he's so far out, he's in the dark. So the dark is considered the abyss. It's considered hidden, but he's still there. Yeah, he's still watching. He still have a big influence on what's going on here, and they still worship him, even though it's done in private or it's done in symbolism throughout your your common life, like for instance, the Nike symbol, Saturn, your video games, the Xbox, the Cube, Saturn, your Bibles and stuff like that, the bee and the bull, all Saturn, the Abrahamic religions, Saturn. So Saturn is everywhere, the Sabbath, the 7-day Sabbath. The way for you to understand the 7-day Sabbath, you have to utilize the moon. What is the moon? The moon is the Cancer or the mother energy. So after every new moon, every 7 days after the new moon, and in this case, our new moon was the 20th, um, which was Saturn day. So every 7 days after the new moon starts the 4-week Sabbath cycle. And the Sabbath is considered the day of Saturn, or Saturn's day, which is the day of rest. All right, so that's how you get yourself back on track according to what the ancients knew, which we're supposed to be remembering today, especially as us as being English people or Anglo-Saxon Berbers. We must know this. All right. So it says, of the Egyptian Atum or Ra, I note these special characteristics. 1, the primeval unity. Atum is the one, but also the all. Though he is the solitary God of beginnings, an assembly of lesser gods emanate from him and revolve in his company. These secondary deities, the part or circle of the gods, constitute Atum's own limbs. Atum's body is the primeval cosmos, denoted by the circle and the sign. This is right here. 2, regulator. Atum is the stationary god, the firm heart of the sky. His hieroglyph, however, is the primitive sledge, signifying to move. As the central light or pivot, he imparts motion to or moves the heavens, while he himself remains in them, Hetep, at rest. Directing the celestial motions and the related cycles, he becomes the god of time. The word. The Egyptians recall Atum as the ancient voice of heaven. The word came into being, and all things were mine when I was alone. I was Ra, Atum, in his first manifestations. The text described the god's first manifestations as the bringing forth of his companions, his limbs, which issue or explode from the god as his fiery speech. This circle of secondary divinities received the name Ku, meaning words of power, but also brilliant lights or glorious lights. 4, water god. As well-known chapter of the Book of the Dead includes this description of Ra. I am the great God who created himself. Who is he? The great God who created himself is the water. It is the abyss, the father of the gods. The great God in the celestial ocean is a lake of fire, are fundamentally one. The waters issue from the God, yet paradoxically give birth to him. 5, the seed. Atum is the masculine power of heaven, the luminous seed embodying all the elements of life, water, fire, air, etc., which flow from him in streams of light. He is the universal source of fertility, animating, impregnating the cosmos. What is the most compelling about the portrait of Atum Ra is the numerous Egyptian divinities duplicate the image. The very traits of the great god outlined above are endlessly repeated in the figures of Osiris, Ptah, Horus, Khafra, and the Amunique, of whom appears as the solitary god in the fiery sea, the god one who brought forth the company of gods as his own limbs, the god of the reverberating speech, the unmoving god producing the celestial revolutions, the final source of waters, and the impregnating seed of the cosmos. If we were to inquire of an Egyptian priest how he arrived at this notion of supreme God, the priest will tell us that he did not arrive at the ideal at all. The great God was a historical divinity who ruled heaven for a time, then departed amid great upheavals. The hymns and ritual texts, the priest will say, simply record the incarnation of the God in the primordial era and recount the massive cataclysms which accompanied collapse of that era. As the following sections will show, the general tradition is global and highly coherent. The universal monarch. The cosmic figure whom the oldest races knew as the creator and supreme God appears in the myths as a terrestrial king, reigning over the golden age. His rule was distinguished for its peace and abundance. He governed not one land alone, but the entire world, becoming the model of the good king. Every terrestrial ruler, according to the kingship rights, received his charisma and authority from his divine predecessor, or from this divine predecessor. No mythical figure remains more enigmatic than the great king to whom so many ancient peoples trace their ancestry. Who was Osiris, the legendary ruler who led the Egyptians out of barbarianism and reigned as king of the entire world? Who was Enki, whom the ancient Sumerians revered as the universal lord and founder of civilization? The same figure appears repeatedly as one passes to India, Greece, China, and the Americas. For the Hindus, it was Yama. For the Greeks, Kronos. For the Chinese, Huan Ti. The Mexicans insisted that the white god Quetzalcoatl was once ruled not only Mexico, but all mankind. In North America, the same idea attached to the primordial figure Manabozho. So vivid are the recollections of the universal monarch that his story usually forms the first chapter in the chronicles of kingship, and the kingship rights meticulously preserve a memory of the god king's rule. Each stage in the inauguration of a new king reenacts the first king's life and death. The rites take the initiated back to the beginning to the mythical creation. An extraordinary theme emerges. In the original age of cosmic harmony and human innocence, the gods dwelt on earth. Presiding over the epoch of peace and plenty was a universal monarch who founded temples and cities and taught humanity the principles of agriculture, law, writing, music, and other civilized arts. This golden age, however, ended in the God King's catastrophic death. Apologize, my words. What is the most puzzling to modern commentators is that the king of the world, ruling on earth, is at the same time the creator, the God one. How did the ancients come upon this paradoxical notion? The age of Chronos. And remember, the word Chronos is where we get the word chronology. Chronology is dealing with time. So for you to even trace or even speaking about regarding the kingship, you had to trace it back in time through chronology, going back to the original king. And in this case, the original king was a god who actually lived on earth. And he had a lineage, a bloodline, but we ain't gonna get into that. So let's continue. So the Greek legends recall a remote and mysterious era of Kronos, the creator god, who, wielding his sickle, ruled from the summit of Olympus, eventually displaced by his own son, against whom he warred violently. Kronos seemed to have appeared to the Greeks as a split personality, at once a radiant god, the very author of the world, and a dark demonic power. But in the old tradition, with roots in the earliest antiquity, Kronos was preeminently the good king, his darker side concealed. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos when he was reigning in heaven. And they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote from free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them. The fruitful earth, unforced, bare them fruit abundantly and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands, with many good things, rich in flocks and loved by the blessed gods. When Hesiod wrote these lines, the golden age of Kronos was but a faint and often confused memory. To observe the antiquity of the idea, one need only refer to the cradles of ancient civilization, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Among the Egyptians, the father of the paradisal age possessed many names, but each tradition proclaimed the same original excellence of creation. Subsequently corrupted, the peaceful epoch was distinctly the age of Kronos, under a different title. Throughout their history, the Egyptians believed in a time of perfection at the beginning of the world, observes Clark. In the earliest age, say the Egyptian sources, the great god was the first king, a ruler whose life served as a model for all the succeeding ages. With the god king Osiris, the Egyptians constantly associated a vanished golden age. As king, Osiris, the beneficent being, taught his subjects to worship the gods, gave them the arts of civilization, and formulated the laws of justice, founding sacred temples and cities and disseminating wisdom from one land to another. He became the benefactor of the whole world, but his eventual murder brought worldwide destruction. Among classical writers, Herodotus, Diodorus, Plutarch, the ideal prevailed that Osiris lived on our earth as a man or a man god. Egyptian sources too often portray him in human form, yet the early religious texts say that again and again that Osiris was the supreme light of heaven, ruling from the cosmic center. He was, in fact, the Lord of the gods, God One. His body formed a circle of the Tuat, the celestial residence of the gods, and the secondary gods themselves constituted the limbs of Osiris. Indeed, the traditions of Cyrus melt into those of Ra, the God One, who came into being in primeval time. Just as Osiris' followers remembered his rule on earth, so did other Egyptians recall the terrestrial reign of the creator Ra. To this age, states Lenormand, the Egyptians continually look back and regret and envy to declare the superiority of one thing above all other things imaginable. It was enough to affirm it's like had never been seen since the days of Ra. Ra, the father of the gods, reigned over the terrestrial world, but wandered away when the heavens fell into disorder. All chronological tradition affirms that Ra had once ruled over Egypt, writes Budge, and it is a remarkable fact that every possessor of the throne of Egypt was proved by some means or the other to have the blood of Ra flowing in his veins. You see, pause. So as you can see, you had to have the blood of Ra in your veins, aka Ra was considered God, and God was considered who? Saturn. So you had to have the blood of Saturn in your veins for you to be on the throne. And we're going to talk to you, explain who Saturn's children are. And there's a reason why Saturn's children get done the way they do. But we'll talk about them later. All chronological tradition affirms that Ra had once ruled over Egypt, writes Budge, and it's a remarkable fact that every possessor of the throne of Egypt was proved by some means or other to have the blood of Ra flowing in his veins. But the same belief applied to Horus, the god king par excellence, as well as Atum, Khepera, Ptah, and Amen. The fact which must be explained is that the memory of the creator king in his original age of abundance was far broader than any local tradition, and the story was not limited to Egypt. According to the theologian and historian Eusebius, who relates the account of the Babylonian priest historian Berosus, the ancient tribes of Chaldea owed their civilization to a powerful and benevolent figure named Oannes, or Oannes, who ruled before the deluge. Prior to Oannes, the tribes lived without order, like the beast. But the new god king who issued from the sea instructed mankind in writing and various arts, the formation of cities, and the founding of temples. He also taught them the use of laws of bounds and divisions, also the harvesting of grains and fruits, and in short, all that pertains to the mollifying of life, he delivered to men. And since that time, nothing more has been invented by anybody. Oannes was simply the Greek name for the Babylonian Ea, the Sumerian Enki, worshipped in the city of Eridu at the mouth of the Euphrates. The tradition dates to the earliest stage of Sumerian history, a time when the myths say the Enki and his wife Damkina governed the lost paradise of Delmun, the pure palace or the pure place of man's genesis. So this is going back to the Genesis story in the Bible. They alone reposed in Delmun, where Enki and his wife reposed. That place was pure, that place was clean. In Delmun, the raven croaked not, the kite shrieked not kite-like, the lion mangled not, the wolf ravaged not the lambs. The inhabitants of this paradise lived in a state of near perfection, drinking the waters of life and enjoying unbounded prosperity. Ruling over this favored domain, Enki introduced civilization to mankind, founded the first cities and temples, and set down the first laws. If in the account of the Berosus, the bringer of civilization appears as a man, or part man, part fish, the earlier accounts call him the creator. His home was the cosmic sea Apsu. The celestial waters of fire raged splendor and terror. The priests of Ea or Enki deemed him Mumu or Mammu, the creative word, like the Egyptian creator Enki brought forth the secondary gods through his own speech. Diverse localities worship the same cosmic power under different names. In the ancient city of Lagash, the priests honored the god Ninurta, as the father of the paradisal age. Ninurta founded temples and cities. The years of his rule, connected with the beginning of the world, were years of plenty. Diverse localities worship the same cosmic power under different names. In the ancient city of Lagash, the priests honored the god Ninurta as the father of the paradisal age. Ninurta founded temples and cities, and the years of his rule connected with the beginning of the world were years of plenty. Ninurta scaled the mountain and scattered seed far and wide, and the plants with one accord named him their king. The Sumerians themselves knew that Ninurta was the same as the vegetation god Damuzi or Tammuz, son of the Apsu, the shepherd of mankind, whom classical mythology knew as Adonis, and whom catastrophic departure or death became the focus of ritual lamentations for many hundreds of years. But Enki, Ninurta, and Damuzi were only aspects of the creator An, whose ideogram, as previously noted, appears as the earliest Mesopotamian sign of divinity. In all the myths and temple hymns, the Sumerian distinguished the present age from that day or the days of old when the gods gave man abundance, the day when vegetation flourished. The supreme figure reigning over this remote age was An, the central and the highest light, whose foremost epithet was Lugal, king. The Sumerians claimed that the very institution of kingship descended from the heaven of An. It was An who produced the beneficent age when the destiny was fixed for everything that was engendered by An, when An engendered the year of abundance. How widespread was this memory of a golden age, founded and governed by the creator himself? It appears that the tradition was either preserved in or migrated to every section of the world. In Mexico, legends recount the ancient rule of Quetzalcoatl, who appeared from the sea to become the good and wise ruler of Talan and the golden age of Anahuac. The legend describes the god as a lawgiver, teacher of the arts, and founder of purified religion. He was the ancestral founding king, and all the later Toltec kings considered themselves his direct descendants of Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs sang. All the arts of the Toltecs, their knowledge, everything came from Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs were wealthy. Their hair, their foodstuffs, their sustenance cost nothing. They say that the squash were big and heavy, and those Toltecs were very rich. They were very happy. There were no poverty or sadness. Nothing was lacking in their houses. There was no hunger among them. In the story of Quetzalcoatl, one finds the same confusion of man and God as in the legends of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The chronicler Sahugan writes, although this Quetzalcoatl had been a man, they respected him as a god. Indeed, he was the creator, for he made the heavens, the sun, the earth. The Toltecs claimed that in the beginning, their race knew only one God. Only one God did they have, and they hailed him as the only God. They invoked him, they supplicated him. His name was Quetzalcoatl. Not only was Quetzalcoatl the giver of life, the legend proclaims that the first divine generation emanated directly from him. But eventually, the god, like his counterparts around the world, suffered a violent fate, bringing to an end his golden age. To the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and American Indian accounts of remote epoch correspond numerous legends of India, Iran, China, and Northern Europe. India, the Hindu Brahma, Yama, Vishnu, and Manu converge as representatives of a solitary supreme god and creator, governing a lost paradise as the first king, setting forth the first moral codes, and imparting to mankind the fundamentals of civilization. Yama appears as the universal lord, Manu as the king of the world or universal legislator, to whom later monarchs traced their lineage. In the beginning, say the Upanishads, there arose the golden child. As soon as born, he alone was Lord of all that is. This was Brahma, the God one, his prosperous epoch, however, ended in his own death in a world destroying conflagration. Iran, Yima, the Iranian transcript of the Hindu Yama, is the patriarchal lord of mankind, the brilliant Yima who first introduced law and civilization to the world. His age knew neither cold nor heat, neither age nor death. So resplendent was his rule that the world assembled around his throne and wandered. But then, when Yima diverged from the path of justice, the glory fled from his kingdom, and he was put to death. Thereupon, the eternal spring became a devastating winter. China, in the earliest age, according to ancient Chinese lore, the purest pleasure and tranquility reigned throughout all nature. Mankind suffered neither hunger, nor pain, nor sorrow. The whole creation enjoyed a state of happiness, and things grew without labor, and a universal fertility prevailed. It was just such a paradise that the Yellow Emperor Huang Ti ruled. Considered the father of the Taoist religion, Huang Ti was the creator, a universal lawmaker and founder of the arts and civilization. He was also immortal, and his fruitful era vanished upon his death. Northern Europe, during the peace of Frodi, a mythical Danish king, no man injured another, and a magical meal ground out peace and plenty for the entire land. Frodi is the Norse god Frey, founder of temples and religious rites, the generous lord under whom peace and fruitfulness abounded, both the lord of the Swedes and god of the world, in the footsteps of the Scandinavian Odin, the creator, well-being, peace, and good seasons followed. The legends style him the first king, the inventor of arts and the source of human wisdom. But the age of Frey dissolved in flames, just as Odin and his prosperous kingdom came crashing down in the fires of Ragnarok. Here, then, is a worldwide motif deeply ingrained in the religious historical records of all principal races. The idea of the Edenic happiness of the first human beings constitutes one of the universal traditions, states Lenormand. Ministering over this age is a universal monarch, while extolled as the solitary supreme God and the creator of the world. He yet appears as a ruler on earth, the ancestor of terrestrial kings. By his teaching, mankind rose from barbarianism, But in the end, the God met a catastrophic fate, and his death or departure brought a violent termination of the first world order. The rights of kingship. The ritual surrounding ancient kings amounts to a summary of ancient beliefs about the universal monarch. For every local sovereign was a successor and representative of the great God who ruled the world during the Golden Age. The rights of kingship testified to the enormous power which the collective memory of this God king held over later generations. Chronicles of kingship from Egypt to Mesopotamia to Persia to China to Italy to Northern Europe to pre-Columbian Mexico all trace the line of kings back to the first king as supreme cosmic deity who founded the kingship rights. Pause. So you, if you claim yourself to be a descendant of the kings or a king himself, you must know this history in regards to the kingship rights and the um, the ancient rights and regarding how did it come to be. Like, how did you become the king, and who was the first king, and who was the first king, a personification of etc. And you have to know this because you have, if you're going to live up to what the first king was, who was known as Saturn, he was known as the king of the golden age. So therefore, when they look at the king, or when we look at a king, we look at someone who's going to bring back the golden age, aka a time of peace, a time of abundance. That's what it truly means to be a king in the eyes of those who actually understands the history of the kingship. Because if you're a king, then you must have the bloodline of that, or he who was actually the establisher of the golden age. And they felt if you was a descendant of he who established the golden age before, then that means you have the ability to establish the golden age again because you recreate yourself. It's reincarnation. That's how that happens. You come back to bring back what it was that you already had established. And that's the reason why the ancient Egyptians believed, all of these cultures believed in the afterlife. All right, but we're going to talk about that later. All right, so it says, when history begins, there are kings, the representatives of the gods, state Holkart. No greater mistake could be made by the historians than to assume that the sovereignty of kings grew out of economic or material concerns. Pause. Exactly. That's what there was getting misconstrued today, is a lot of people who claim or want to be kings don't understand that you wasn't a king because somebody made you a king, or because you wanted to be a king because of either economic or material concerns. No, the history of a king go all the way back to a time that you have no understanding about. And like they said, and this was during a time where our lords above actually walked amongst us and established a race, or aka a bloodline down here, and the lineage that kept the kingship going. But let's continue. So the king was a product, instead, the crucial forces were religious. The king was a product of the ancient ritual, and the ritual centered in cosmic beliefs, which for several millennia could not be shaken loose. To comprehend the mighty influence of kingship in the ancient world, one must penetrate the mystery of the king's prototype, the universal monarch. I repeat, so let me reread this. No greater mistake could be made by historians than to assume that the sovereignty of kings grew out of economic or material concerns. Instead, the crucial forces were religious. The king was a product of ancient ritual, and the ritual centered in cosmic beliefs, which for several millennia could not be shaken loose. To comprehend the mighty influence of kingship in the ancient world, one must penetrate the mystery of the king's prototype, the universal monarch. In the first king's life and rule originated the prerogatives and obligations of all local sovereigns. It was the duty of every king to perform the rites instituted by the great God in the beginning, and to renew it, if only symbolically, the primordial era of peace and plenty. In the ritual, the king turns the will of law, first turned by the great gods, rides on the gods' own cosmic ship, takes as spouse the great mother, mistress of the great father, builds temples and cities patterned after the gods' celestial abode, and subdues the forces of darkness, barbarians, just as the god defeated chaos in the beginning. Whatever the marvels of the great father, it is the duty of each local king to repeat them, or at least ritually to reenact these accomplishments as if he were the great God himself. In his study of kingship in Egypt, Henry Frankfurt tells us that the great God was the first king. Whether named Ra, Capri, or Atum, he is the prototype of Pharaoh, and the texts abound in phrases drawing the comparison. To certify his authority as the successor of the universal monarch, the king credits himself with having introduced the age of abundance, like that of the ancestral sovereign. Thus, Thutmose III not only sits upon the throne of Atum, but claims to have achieved what have not have been done since the time of Ra, and to have restored conditions as they were in the beginning. Amenhotep III strives to make the country flourish as in primeval times. All right, so as you can see, once again, the king's obligation was to bring upon the golden age as he who walked before them, who set the standard and foundation of what it was that lived at a time of good and plenty. All right, in this case, it was Ra. All right. Similarly, when the Sumerian king Dungi ascended the throne, the people supposed that a champion had arisen to restore the paradise which existed before the flood, but was lost through transgression. Each king, states Alfred Jeremias, was expected to reproduce the wonders of the great God, the primeval king. Thus does Assurbanipal proclaim that upon his succession to the throne, Raman has sent forth his reign. The harvest was plentiful, the corn was abundant, the cattle multiplied exceedingly. Among the Hebrews, every king is a Messiah, and at times the hope is expressed that the king will introduce a new golden age. Such is the test of the just or good ruler who brings prosperity in a fruitful earth. This belief, which seems to have held sway over the entire ancient world, receives insufficient attention from historians. It points directly to the extraordinary memory of the universal monarch. Consider Homer gives us the idol, a blameless king whose fame goes up to the wide heaven, maintaining right, and the black earth bears wheat, barley, and the trees are laden with fruit, and the sheep bring forth and fail not, and the sea hives store fish, and all from his good guidance, and the people prosper. Can this be anything other than the lost age of Kronos? Why should a fertile soil confirm the righteousness of kings? The connection becomes clear once one takes the universal monarch as more than an esoteric fiction. It recognizes him as the shaping force behind the ideals of kingship. Justice, peace, and plenty following in the footsteps of the first idol, good king, they should follow those of his successors who share in the charisma of the great predecessor. The further we go back in history, observes Young, the more evident does the king's divinity become. And the Near East, the whole essence of kingship was based far more on theological than on political considerations. It was self-evident that the king was the magical source of welfare and prosperity for the entire organic community of man, animal, and plant, from whom flowed the life and prosperity of his subjects, the increase of the herds, and the fertility of the land. This image of the local king is drawn directly from the image of the universal monarch. Thus did every ancient ruler call himself the king of the world and claim to radiate power and light. Thompson tells us that the Mayan ruler declared himself as something like king of kings, ruler of the world, region of earth, and the great Izalna, a sort of divine right of kings which would have turned James I green with envy. What Thompson calls an inflated notion of grandeur seems to characterize all ancient kings, who shine like the sun and direct the heavenly motions. But the reason must be appreciated. Every king was, in a magical way, the universal monarch reborn. The institution and the ritual of kingship point to the same great God and the same golden age as do the myths of cosmic beginnings. And what historical condition did this collective memory originate? And if the universal monarch governed the entire heavens as the God one, why was he called an ancestor, the heaven man? So vivid was the great Father's celestial image, and so overpowering was his influence on civilization in its infancy, that the ancient chroniclers often gave him human form, recalling him as the first man. But he was no mortal of flesh and blood. In his original character, he upheld the cosmos as the heaven man, a celestial giant whose body encompassed all the gods and composed the primeval matter of creation. The great Father reigned over the prosperous age, and then departed amid great upheavals. The mythical accounts give this imposing figure such tangible and human traits that more than one scholar reduces him to a living man. an esteemed tribal ancestor whose heroic exploits succeeding generations progressively enlarged until the entire universe came under his authority. This is the approach of William Ridgway, who, in the survey of the best known figures of the Great Father, argues that only an actual tribal chief could have left such a profound imprint on primitive communities. Ridgway asks us whether the abstract sky or the solar orb or a vegetation spirit common explanations of the Great Father could produce such devotion as evident in the annual lamentations over the ruler's catastrophic death. Osiris, Brahma, Tammuz, Quetzalcoatl, their devotees remember each as living ancestor whose passing was a terrifying calamity. Of course, Ridgway does not assume that one man alone accounts for all the traditions of a great father. Rather, he seeks to identify each in terms of historical quite distinct from the venerated ancestors of the other tribes. Prevailing astronomical and vegetation theories carry great weight. They fail to explain the global parallel between the respective myths, nor can one reconcile Ridgway's interpretation with the incontrovertible fact that in the earliest accounts, the Great Father is manifestly cosmic, that many sacred histories, however, present the Creator King in human form as a paradox requiring an explanation. The solution lies in the nature of the legendary first man. Who is Adam? If one compares the traditions of Adam with the global image of the Great Father, there can be little doubt that this primal ancestor was simply a special form of the universal monarch. According to Hebrew legends, Adam's stature was so great that he extended from earth to the center of heaven. His countenance obscured the sun. Like the universal monarch, Adam was Lord on earth to rule and control it, teaching his subjects the first arts and sciences. The myth says that the terrestrial creatures took him to be their creator and they all came to offer him adoration. While the chroniclers call this a mistake, substantial evidence shows that the tradition pertained more to a god than a man. In Gnostic and other mystic systems, Adam was not immortal, but a cosmic being whose body contained the seed of all later creation. As observed by G.G. Sholem, summarizing the traditions of the Hebrew Kabbalah, Adam or Adam Kadmon the primordial man, that is, a vast representation of the power of the universe, which is concentrated in him. This Adam is a man of light, occupying the center of the cosmos and radiating energy along the axis of the universe. He is creator and supporter of the world, whose body encloses all the elements of life. Islamic mystics call Adam the universal man or the perfect man, upholding the cosmos. To the Ophites of the early Christian era, he was Adamus, the man from on high, or in the words of Lenormand, the typical perfect man, that is, the heavenly prototype of man. On one of the cosmogonic fragments preserved in the extracts of Sancti and Sanctioniathon, as recorded by Philo of Byblos, Adam was born at the beginning of all things and is identical with the Greek Uranus, which is Uranus, which is known as heaven. The modern day Mandeans of Iraq know Adam as the king of the universe, a personification of all that spiritual man is intended to be and achieve. This, of course, sounds almost exactly like the primordial god, one of global legend. Indeed, in the myths of many lands, the first man and creator king are identical. Though the Hindu Yama and his counterpart Manu appear as the creator and king of the world, they also signify the primal ancestor. Their character as first man, however, does not mean flesh and blood. They are the celestial prototypes, notes Lenormand, symbolic of man in general. And the role of the Hindu Yama is filled in Persian myth not only by Yima, but also by Gaia Maritime, a legendary first king, a man of perfect purity, produced brilliant and white, radiant and tall. He too appears as the prototype of mankind. Many myths make no distinction between creator and the first man. The oceanic Tiki is at once the first man and the creator progenitor of man. Among the Koryak, the creator of the world is also the first man, the father and protector of the Koryak. Assiniboine, a North American Siwan tribe, say that it was the first man who brought the world out of primeval water. They also said the first man, the creator, that no one made him, that no one made him, and that he is immortal. The Altaic type Tatar similarly speak of a world man or first man. In the creation myths, he doubles for God himself and raises the world from the cosmic waters, comparable to the world man of the Lapps or the lonely man, whom the Yakuts deem first ancestor whose dwelling pierced the summit of heaven. In the journal tradition by our guide, Adam was the solitary god of beginnings, presented in human form. This was the opinion of the controversial Gerald Macy, who, enchanted by the depth of Egyptian cosmology, proposed that the Hebrew Adam echoed the older Egyptian Atum, the god who shone forth alone in the abyss. It matters little whether the relationship of the two figures is as direct as Macy suggested. Throughout the ancient world, the original God one passed into the legendary first ancestor. As the creative intelligence and voice, word of heaven, the great father came to be viewed as the thinking and speaking man, a towering giant whose body was the original cosmos. Both Atum and the later Adam possessed this distinctive character as heaven man, but certain developments of the idea stand out. In the Egyptian version of the myth, the great god Atum Ra, through tumultuous speech, brings forth a circle of subordinate gods as satellites, revolving in his company and forming his own limbs. The central god and his revolving members compose the primordial cosmos, heaven and world, and a crucial term is Pa'u, primeval matter, referring to the material emitted by the Atum, which took form as the cosmos. Pa'u is equivalent to the ku or fiery words of power uttered by the great god. The term signifies at once the circle of the gods and the body of Atum Ra, which is to say, cosmos equals company of gods equals creator's limbs, body. That the created cosmos emanated from the primordial god is a theme which persisted in later traditions of Adam. From Adam Cadman sprang successive degrees of creation. Gnostic tradition knew Adam as the prima materia of the cosmos, a remarkable parallel to the Egyptian primeval matter, the limbs of Atum Ra. The great god's body embraces in his heaven, not only in Egyptian, but in all principal cosmologies. Like Atum, the Sumerian, and encompasses the entire heaven. Indeed, his very name signifies heaven, and one can trace the equation of God and heaven, or shining heaven, through all of the ancient languages. The Chinese Tian signifies both the high God and heaven, as does the Altaic Tengri. The Sanskrit Deus, Latin Deus, carries the double meaning God and heaven. It is useless to look to the open sky for an explanation of this equivalence. Originally, heaven meant the organized cosmos or body of the God one, formed by the circle of lesser gods. The myths unanimously insist that the celestial order collapsed with the death of the great God, the heaven man. 2. The all-embracing character of the great father facilitated an important development of the God's image at the time, when cultural mixture could have destroyed the monotheistic theme. In ancient Egypt, almost every district seems to have had its favorite representative of God one, a fact which gives the great compendiums of Egyptian religion, the pyramid texts, a misleading appearance of confusion. How can we speak of a solitary God when the Egyptian texts refer to an endless number of primary deities? In more than one locality, the priests themselves at least partially resolved the problem by adopting alien gods as the limbs of the local great god, a process obviously encouraged by the pre-existing image of the god that has heaven man. This habit was widespread in Egypt and occurred as early as the pyramid texts, which assimilate a number of once independent gods into the body of Atum. Your head is Horus of the Netherland, O imperishable. Your nose is the jackal, Apua. Your teeth are Sopid, or O imperishable. Your hands are happy and Duamutif. Your feet are Amnesty and Kupsanov. A hymn for the papyrus of Ani similarly honors Osiris. The hair of Osiris Ani is the hair of Nu. The face of Osiris Ani is the face of Ra. The eyes of Osiris Ani are the eyes of Hathor. The ears of Osiris Ani are the ears of Habut. The lips of Osiris Ani are the lips of Abu. In almost the same words, the papyrus of Nu joins the divinities Osiris, Ptah, Anpu, Hathor, Horus, Isis, and others to the body of Ra. In the Memphite theology, Atum, Horus, Thoth, and the company of gods became the limbs of Ptah. Syncretization of the sort, though appearing absurd to us today, actually helped to preserve the original idea against the eroding forces of cultural assimilation. Faced with a growing number of competing deities, the priest proclaimed there was only one great God in the beginning, whose body encompassed the circle of subordinate deities. In a subsequent development of the myth, the heaven man passed into a mythical philosophical explanation of our earth and the material universe as a whole. Here the god appears as a primordial giant who existed before the deluge and gave his body to creation, not the creation of the primordial cosmos, but of our world with its mountains, seas, clouds, and surrounding heavenly bodies. A noteworthy example is the Scandinavian primeval giant Ymir. In the prowess Edda, the gods fashioned the world from a giant's body, from his blood the sea and lakes, from his flesh the earth, from his bones the mountains. His teeth become rocks and pebbles, his skull the sky, and his brains the clouds. The sparks and burning embers produced by his dismemberment become the stars. Compared to Hindu giant Purusha, whose body formed a world, his mouth was the Brahman, his 2 eyes the Vasya. From his 2 feet the Sudra was born. The moon was born from his mind. From his eyes the sun was born. From his navel was produced the air. From his head the sky was evolved. From his 2 feet the earth. From his ears the quarters. Purusha is the primal man. In Buddhist lore, his comic giant is Bodhisattva Manjukri. Elsewhere in China, the role belongs to the demiurge Panku, whose body provides the material for creation. The Zoroastrians claim that the created world was the giant sphere, cosmos, the great body or the body of the great god Zervan. All such heaven-sustaining giants can be best understood by reference to the original cosmos of the God One, rather than the open expanse to which the term heaven normally refers today. 4. If the giant myths emphasize the material form of the heaven man, an age of metaphysics stressed the God's character as universal intelligence, raising his image to a high degree of philosophical purity. The God One became the first principle, first cause, mind, word, or self, logos, nous, Sophia, Thou, etc. Yet in none of these cases did detached philosophy succeed in creating a pure abstraction. The Greek nous, the animating mind or intelligent spirit, was never fully divorced from the antecedent tradition of the heaven man. Both Eusebius and Syncellus identified a great mind with Prometheus, the primordial man who lived before the deluge. The Orphic description of universal mind, it is hardly distinguishable from the Hindu giant Purusha or Purusha. All things were contained within the vast womb of the god. Heaven was his head, the bright beams of the stars was his radiant locks, the all-productive earth was his sacred womb, the circling ocean was his belt, his body was the universe, his radiant immovable internal, and the pure ether was his intellectual soul. The body knows by which he pervades, animates, preserves, and governs all things. Nous, uh, Here, the original concept certainly did not mean invisible soul or anything like it. The cosmic self was Brahma or the Prajapati, the golden child who appeared alone on the first occasion in the beginning. Say the Upanishads, Prajapati stood alone. The same text say in the beginning there was self alone. From the primordial self enclosing all the life elements issued the creation of successive degrees. From the self sprang ether, from ether, air, from air, fire, from fire, water. Adam Cadman radiated the elements in similar fashion. Hindu thought portrays the universal self as the first form and the animating soul of the heaven man. In the beginning, this universe was nothing but the self in the form of a man. It looked around and saw that there was nothing but itself, whereupon its first shout was, "It is I." Hence the concept, "I arose." Then the self poured forth the creation. The created world, cosmos, in Hindu myth took form as the giant Purusha, recognized as the body of Prajapati, Brahma self. Numerous traditions view the emanation of pouring out of the creation of the great God's speech. This is the root meaning of the Greek Hebrew word, which signified really visible speech. The Chinese Tao, the primeval unity, or the first cause, also conveys the idea to speak. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, states the Hebrew psalmist. This idea of the creative word of God, observes John Allegro, came to have a profound philosophical and religious importance, and was, and still is, the subject of much metaphysical debate. But originally, it was not an abstract notion you could see, the word of God. In the Hebrew creation legend, the speech of the creator is poured out as spittle or seed. The most forceful spurting of this seed is accompanied by thunder and the shrieking wind. The imagery takes us back to the thundering voice of Atum. In most creation legends, and certainly in the Egyptian and Sumerian prototypes, the great father, his life-bearing rays, his voice, word, and the company of God's limbs all appear as power seen and heard. The god is the celestial man, whose history became the overwhelming obsession of ancient ritual, residing at the stationary center of the domain which the Egyptians called Mayat, truth or wisdom, and the Mesopotamians dominated Apsu, residence of wisdom. The god commanded the cosmic revolutions. He was, in short, the creative intelligence producing a new harmonious celestial order. Thus was the heaven man, the idol man, and the idol king. The great father Saturn. The lost epoch of peace and plenty was the age of the planet Saturn. Ancient myths and rites present Saturn as the god one, the first king in the all-encompassing heaven man. Adam, the first ancestor, presided over a garden of abundance. Among the Hebrews, such sacred occasions as the Sabbath and Jubilee commemorated this original state of man and the world. When Adam ruled Eden and the land produced freely without human effort, the Greek celebration of the Chronia similarly harkened back to the lost golden age of Kronos. The parallel was no coincidence. Adam was Kronos in human form. What the Greeks called the Chronia, celebrating the fortunate era of Kronos, the Latins termed the Saturnalia, a symbolic renewal of the Saturnia Regna, or the reign of the planet Saturn. In the mystic heritage, Saturn is the universal monarch, whose prosperous age all ancient people sought to recover. These are the words with which James G. Fraser summarizes the Latin tradition. Saturn lived on earth long ago as a righteous and beneficent king of Italy, drew the rude and scattered dwellers on the mountains together, taught them to till the ground, gave them laws, and ruled in peace. His reign was the fabled Golden Age. The earth brought forth abundantly. No sound of war or discord troubled the happy world. No baleful love of lucre worked like poison in the blood of the industrious and contented peasantry. Slavery and private property were alike unknown. All men had all things in common. At last, the good king, the kindly king, vanished suddenly, but his memory was cherished to distant ages. Shrines were reared in his honor, and many hills and high places in Italy bore his name. The Latin poet Ovid knew the tradition well. The first millennium was the age of gold. Then living creatures trusted one another. People did well without the thought of ill. Nothing forbidden in the books of laws. No fears, no prohibitions read in the bronze or in the sculpted face of judge and master. No brass lipped trumpets called, nor clanging swords, nor helmets marched the streets. Country and town had never heard of war, and seasons traveled. Through the years of peace, the innocent earth learned neither spade nor plow. She gave her riches as fruit hangs from the tree, grapes dropping from the vine, cherry and strawberry, ripened in silver shadows of the mountain, and in the shade of Jove's miraculous tree, the falling acorn, springtide, the single season of the year. But then, states Ovid, old Saturn fell to death's dark country. There is not a race on earth that forgot this cataclysmic event. The death of Saturn, the universal monarch, or the fall of Adam, the heaven man, and the people's world over. For thousands of years, it waited the full turn of time's will, when Saturn's kingdom would reappear again to rescue the world from a decadent age of iron, the present age marking the lowest of the descending ages after the Golden Age. The powerful memory of Saturn's age gave rise to a prophesied return, as announced in the famous line of Virgil. Now is come the last age of the Cuman prophecy. The great cycle of periods is born anew. Now returns the maid, returns the reign of Saturn. Now from high heaven descends a new generation. And O holy goddess of childbirth, Lucina, do thou be gracious as the boy's birth, in whom the iron race shall begin to cease and the golden to arise all over the world. That Saturn governed the golden age is a supreme tenet of the ancient mysteries. This is why the most sacred day of the week, commemorating the primordial era, was dedicated to Saturn. The Hebrew Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, was the day of Saturn, as was the seventh day of the Babylonian and Phoenician weeks. For the Romans, the seventh day was the Saturni dies, Saturn's day. This was the Anglo-Saxon day of Cedar, Saturn, which of the course became our Saturday. The archaic god one, the father of all the gods, was not the solar orb, not the open sky, but the planet Saturn. Saturn possessed the double property of being the forefather of all other planetary gods and of having his seat in the highest heaven, writes R. Klimbensky, E. Panofsky, and R. Saxo in their study of Saturn and melancholy. The tradition was maintained with striking consistency from its early expressions in Sumero-Babylonian religion through the age of medieval astrology. On the subject of Mesopotamian religion and astronomy, three wide respected researchers are Peter Jensen, Alfred Jeremias, and Stephen Langton. A survey of their works will reveal these conclusions concerning the identity of the great god in Mesopotamia. Um, the oldest and highest of the Sumero-Babylonian gods, whose primordial age was the year of abundance, signifies Saturn according to Jensen. The same verdict is tactically maintained by Jeremias and Langdon, who identified the great god Ninurta as both the planet Saturn and a form of Anu. The shepherd Tammuz was likewise Saturn according to Jeremias, and one can add the well-known fact that the Sumerian Enki, Babylonian Ea, the Oinus Berosus, came to be translated Kronos, Saturn by the Greeks. The identity of the creator king as the planet Saturn seems to occur throughout the ancient world. The Canaanite in Hebrew El, closely corresponding to the Sumero-Babylonian An, was Saturn. The Hindu Manu, the king of the world, was Satyvrata, the planet Saturn. Colleagues tell us that Yima, the Iranian transcript of the Hindu Yama, god of the golden age, likewise denoted Saturn. The Zoroastrians knew Saturn as the heaven-sustaining Zervan, the king and the lord of the long dominion. The Chinese Huang Di, mythical founder of the Taoist religion, is acknowledged to be Saturn. Even the Tahitians say Fetuti, the planet Saturn, Saturn, that he was the king. In classical thought, Saturn is the primordial Satus, seed from which the cosmos sprang, the mind or cause which brought forth original creation, the universal source of water, fertility and vegetation, and Father Time, the regulator of the cosmic cycle. It was Saturn who, before retiring to the nether realm, dwelt on Earth, establishing his rule over the entire world. An Orphic fragment declares Orpheus reminds us that Saturn dwelt openly on Earth and among men. This before the reign of Zeus, Cronus, Saturn ruled on this very earth, writes Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Saturn was the cosmic atom, bringing forth a company of secondary deities as his own limbs. In the ancient Sumerian city Lagash, the priest deemed Saturn Nidgursu or Ninurta, the man whose stature filled the Anki, the entire cosmos. The Sumerio-Babylonian worshippers of the planet Saturn, observes Hildegard Louis, conceived their god as the embodiment of the whole universe, the various deified astral as well as natural phenomena being imagined as members of this divine body, and therefore as executors of a unique will. The guiding idea was a belief in the existence of only one great God. To preserve the strictly monotheistic principle, notes Louis, the priest composed this hymn to Saturn, Ninurta. O Lord, thy face is the sky. Thy two eyes, O Lord, are the gods Enlil and Ninlil. The lids of thy eyes, the lid of thy two eyes are Gula and Belit Ili. The white of thy two eyes, O Lord, are the twin gods Sin and Nergal. The lashes of thy two eyes are the radiance of the sun god. Thy chin, O Lord, is the astral Ister. The gods Anum and Antum are thy two lips. Thy tongue is the god Papasad. Though the language pertains to the later evolved imagery of the heaven man, it leaves no doubt that the archaic doctrine conceived Saturn's body as the entire cosmos. The legendary cosmic giant originated in the mythical recollections of Saturn's all-encompassing form. In Zoroastrian myth, the celestial giant is Zervan, widely recognized as Saturn. The mystic tradition defines Zervan as the first principle and the original seed. He writes, writes Zahner, the father of the cosmos. From his seed proceeds the entire material cosmos. In the creation, Zervan provided or emitted the original unformed matter from which the will of the cosmos was produced. The idea is precisely that of the Egyptian primeval matter or the alchemist prima materia, example, Adam, the primordial man. The created cosmos say that the Zoroastrian text took the form of an immense giant named Spear, housing the elements of fire, wind, water, and earth. The spear was the first body, the body of Zervan of the long dominion, as the god whose body is the firmament. He is the macrocosm, cosmos as a whole, corresponding to man and the microcosm, cosmos in a miniature, observes Zahner. Thus did Zervan come to be viewed as the prototype of man, eventually acquiring human form as the first ancestor, the origin of the human race. Saturn's identity as the heaven man and the first ancestor occurs again and again in the Gnosticism and alchemy and in the traditions of the Kabbalah. As the first man, observes Young, Adam is Homo Maximus, the anthropos, man par excellence, from whom the macrocosm arose, or who is the macrocosm. He is not only the prima materia, but a universal soul, which is also the soul of all men. Saturn, Young adds, is a synonym for Adam and the prima materia. The planet is the philosophical man or original man, the blessed man on high, the archman Adamus. In the great magical papyrus of Paris, Kronos Saturn is Lord of the world, first father. Orphic thought identities the primordial man Prometheus with Saturn. The Lapps speak of the ancient war within Ome, or world man, who is the same as Saturnus. And Norse legend identifies Saturn as the heaven man Crowder. All of this means simply that the primordial cosmos originally signified the limbs of Saturn, a circle of secondary lights revolving in the company of the giant planet. The terms conventionally translated as cosmos, heaven, world, universe, or firmament. As in the previous paragraph denoted, the primeval celestial order of which Saturn was king and which collapsed with Saturn's fall. The Saturn myth reconstructed. From the foregoing evidence, a distinctive portrait of Saturn emerges. In the earlier age recalled by the ancients, the planet or protoplanet came forth from the cosmic sea to establish dominion over the primeval cosmos. The planet god ruled as a solitary central light, worshipped as the god one, the only god in the beginning. Saturn's epoch left a memory of such impact that later generations esteemed the god as the universal monarch, the first and idle king, during whose rule occurred the prehistoric leap from the barbarianism to civilization. Throughout Saturn's era of cosmic harmony, no seasonal vicissitudes threatened men with the hunger or starvation, and men suffered neither labor nor war. In the creation, Saturn, the primal seed, ejected the fiery material, the primeval matter, which congealed into a circle of lesser lights, the cosmos. The myths describe this resounding birth of the secondary gods as Saturn's speech. Saturn was the word or voice of heaven. The ancients conceived Saturn as the visible intelligence bringing forth the cosmos as its own body and regulating its revolutions. Thus was the planet denominated the heaven man, a being eventually recalled as the prototype of the human race, the first ancestor. When Saturn departed the world, the golden age catastrophically ended. This is the universal tale of the dying god, the overthrown first king or fallen first man. Whether betrayed by a dark force or chastised for having committed the forbidden sin, or inflicted with old age and the weariness of mankind, the result is the same, a corruption of nature and a progressive worsening of the human condition. The story is the first, and one could almost say, only theme of tragedy and drama of antiquity. Saturn's golden age came to a sudden and a catastrophic end, either caused by or accompanied by the fall of the great god. That the distant planet Saturn could loom at the center of ancient rites is a fact which conventional wisdom will not easily explain. One looks in vain for any characteristic of Saturn, the present day planet which might account for Saturn, the primeval god. Could the present speck of light have provoked the ancient memory of a creator standing alone in the deep, or produced the universal legend of the first king in the lost age of abundance, or inspired that myth of the heaven man? If, as it almost universally believed, the heavens have undergone no major changes in astronomically recent times, then the myth, however meticulously developed, can only be fabrication, produced with the purest disregard for the actual observation and experience. I do not ask the reader to ignore this possibility, and I am fully aware that many mythologists, myth and fancy are synonymous. Since the argument of this book rests on the incoherence of the Saturn myth as a whole, and since many details remain to be covered, I urge only a willingness to consider the evidence in its entirety. Whatever the true origins of the myth, it constituted for the ancients a compelling vision, a vision deserving careful study by all students of history, religion, and mythology. And we're going to go ahead and stop right there on part one regarding the Saturn myth. For those of you who have been paying attention so far, please give some of your comments, some of your opinion in regards to what you've heard. So far, what I've done my research over the various years, I come to see this as being um, more in line with a lot of what I believe, and then to come to accept based off of my own observation. And so with that being said, stay tuned to part two. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and continue to keep do your due diligence. Father Time is paying attention, aka Father Saturn, i.e. Father, the All Father, and he is considered the primeval son. And this information is now starting to come more into the light of day, which it should always has been. Peace.